Welcome to another episode of New Perspectives. I'm Casey Davis Uchok, and this episode began the way many research paths do, by accident. I came across images while looking for something else, and they stopped me. Vast sandstone formations, arches rising out of the desert, deep canyons holding traces of water, and signs of human life in a part of the Sahara that is rarely visited. This is the Ennedi Plateau in northeastern Chad. As I read more, it became clear that Ennedi holds one of the longest continuous records of human life in Africa, preserved through rock art, settlement traces, water systems, and movement across the land. This place tells the story of how people lived when the Sahara was wetter, how daily life shifted as rainfall declined, and how knowledge of the landscape became central to survival. That was enough to know this was a place worth an episode. The Ennedi Plateau, also known as the Ennedi Massif, lies in northeastern Chad near the border with Sudan. It rises above the surrounding desert as a broad expanse of sandstone highlands within the eastern Sahara. The plateau formed millions of years ago through the accumulation of sedimentary layers. Over time, erosion exposed and sculpted these layers into cliffs, deep gorges, isolated pillars, and natural arches. One of the most prominent features is the Aloba Arch, among the largest natural stone arches in the world. Ennedi's landscape shows clear evidence of long-term interaction with water. Rounded canyon walls and deeply cut channels point to sustained erosion by flowing rivers over extended periods. These features provide direct evidence that parts of the Sahara, including this region, were once far wetter and more vegetated, during a period when rivers flowed and grasslands covered areas that are now desert. Elevation plays a key role in how water behaves here. Rainfall can collect in shaded gorges, seep into porous sandstone, and re-emerge as pools or springs. This allowed water to remain accessible even as rainfall declined across the wider Sahara, helping sustain life in the region longer than in the surrounding lowlands. To understand why this landscape once held so much water, you have to zoom out and look at the Sahara as a whole. Between roughly 10 to 5,000 years ago, much of North Africa experienced a prolonged phase of increased rainfall, known as the African Humid Period. Changes in Earth's orbital cycles strengthened monsoon systems, pushing rainfall far north into what is now the Sahara. During this time, the Sahara supported grasslands, lakes, rivers, and wetlands. Evidence from pollen records, lake sediments, and fossil remains show that vegetation was widespread and diverse. Large bodies of water existed in areas that are now dominated by sand and rock. Wildlife thrived under these conditions. Archaeological and fossil evidence indicates the presence of animals such as giraffes, antelope, cattle, crocodiles, and hippos across regions that are today extremely arid. These species depended on stable water sources and sustained vegetation. Human communities also lived throughout this environment. They hunted, fished in rivers and lakes, gathered plants, and gradually began domesticating animals. Seasonal movement followed water availability, and social networks extended across wide areas of the landscape. During this period, the Ennedi Plateau functioned as part of a broad, habitable region rather than as an isolated highland. Its rock shelters, dependable water sources, and elevated terrain supported repeated and long-term human activity. Archaeological research shows repeated human occupation in and around the Ennedi Plateau throughout the African Humid Period. Evidence includes stone tools, hearths, and the remains of campsites. most often located near reliable water sources and naturally sheltered areas. Rock shelters provided protection from heat and wind, while nearby water supported everyday activities such as cooking, tool making, food preparation, and the processing of animal and plant resources. The presence of multiple occupation layers at the same sites suggests that groups return to familiar locations over long periods, sometimes across many generations. Daily life was closely tied to seasonal conditions. People adjusted their movements in response to rainfall patterns, animal migrations, and the availability of plants. Social organization played an important role, supporting cooperation and the sharing of knowledge about where and when resources could be found. As environmental conditions began to change, Ennedi's geography became increasingly important. Its elevated terrain and deep canyon systems retained water longer than the surrounding lowlands. This allowed human activity to continue here, even as conditions in other parts of the Sahara became more difficult, reinforcing Ennedi's role as a stable place within a changing landscape. Alongside tools and campsites, another record of daily life accumulated here over thousands of years: art. Ennedi contains one of the most extensive concentrations of rock art in Africa. Tens of thousands of paintings and engravings appear across caves, rock shelters, and exposed cliff faces throughout the plateau. This body of art spans several thousand years and reflects changes in environment, economy, and social organization. Archaeologists group the imagery into broad phases based on subject matter, style, and technique. Earlier images depict animals associated with wetter conditions, including large wildlife and scenes related to hunting, fishing, and the presence of water. These images correspond closely with environmental evidence from the African humid period. As conditions became drier, cattle appear more frequently in the artwork. This shift aligns with archaeological evidence for the development of pastoralism. Herding offered a more flexible and mobile food system as wildlife populations declined and environmental conditions became less stable. Over time, human figures become increasingly prominent. People are shown walking, standing in groups, dancing, or interacting with animals. Details such as clothing, tools, and posture provide insight into everyday activities and social practices. Later, imagery tends to be more stylized and abstract. This change coincides with increased mobility and a reduced emphasis on permanent settlement. Rather than serving as symbolic or ceremonial art, much of the imagery reflects daily life, allowing environmental and social change to become visible through shifts in subject matter. Because the artwork accumulated gradually over long periods, it forms a layered visual record that researchers continue to study today. Rainfall across the Sahara declined gradually over many generations. Lakes shrank, rivers became seasonal, and vegetation retreated southward. These changes unfolded over long periods, shaping daily life incrementally rather than within a single lifetime. Human communities responded through gradual adaptation. Hunting declined as large wildlife populations shifted or disappeared, while herding became increasingly central to survival. Settlements grew smaller and more temporary, reflecting the need for flexibility as resources became less predictable. Movement patterns changed as well. Seasonal mobility increased, allowing people to follow reliable water sources and grazing areas. Social systems adapted to support shared access to resources, coordinated movement, and the transmission of knowledge about changing conditions. Evidence from the Ennedi Plateau shows that people adjusted repeatedly as conditions continued to change. These adaptations persisted over long periods, until the environment could no longer support permanent settlement and mobility became the dominant way of life. One of the defining features of the Ennedi Plateau is the presence of deltas, permanent or semi-permanent water pools found deep within narrow gorges. Deltas form when rainfall and groundwater collect in shaded areas where evaporation is limited. Water slowly filters through porous sandstone and accumulates over time, sometimes re-emerging at the surface. Some deltas persist year-round, while others fluctuate with seasonal rainfall. These water sources support a wide range of life, including fish, reptiles, birds, and other mammals. They also sustain livestock and make human movement through the region possible, acting as critical stopping points in an otherwise arid landscape. The reliability of deltas helps explain why Ennedi remained part of human movement networks long after surrounding areas became increasingly dry. Nomadic groups, particularly the Tubu people, continue to move through parts of the Ennedi Plateau today. Their way of life depends on detailed, practical knowledge of the landscape rather than permanent settlement. This knowledge includes the location of water sources, seasonal conditions, travel distances, and safe routes through difficult terrain. It develops through direct experience and is passed down through families and communities, allowing movement to remain predictable over time. Movement patterns tend to remain stable because stability supports safety and resource management. Water sources are protected, access is regulated through shared rules, and overuse is actively avoided. Today, Tubu communities follow established routes linked to protected water sources, maintaining practices shaped by long experience with the landscape. In 2016, the Ennedi Plateau was designated a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. The designation recognizes both the region's geological formations and its long record of human activity, preserved through rock art, settlement traces, and water systems. Protecting the site presents ongoing challenges due to its size, remoteness, and limited infrastructure. Conservation efforts focus on controlled access, local involvement, and minimizing physical impact on sensitive features such as rock art sites and permanent water sources. Tourism in the region remains very limited because of difficult access and distance from major population centers. There are ongoing security concerns as well. As a result, most visitors are researchers or conservation workers with only a small number of guided expeditions reaching the area. As we come to the end of this episode, we've been looking at a place that remains largely unknown, remote, rarely visited, and seldom discussed outside of specialist research, despite holding one of the longest continuous records of human life in Africa. That combination is what makes it so compelling, and I hope it intrigued you as well. That's all for this episode of New Perspectives. I'm Casey Davis Uchoke. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious, keep discovering, and stay tuned to AFROTURK TV.